Guys, Boxing Gossip here. Hope everyone's doing well. So as you guys know, I've had quite a few weeks on the channel, and one of the main stories I've missed is David Haye versus Tony Bellew. So here is my video on that fight. Let's start with why is this fight happening? Now, long-term viewers of the channel and guys who listen to me rambling on in certain videos may recall that I have long suspected this fight will happen. Let's look at the motivators for both guys. Let's start with Tony Bellew. Tony Bellew is a guy who, in my opinion, and I will admit to having underrated Tony Bellew for years, but in my opinion, Tony Bellew has reached the top of the mountain. He is one of British boxing's biggest overachievers. Even in Tony Bellew's own words, he has said something to the effect of he doesn't believe he will ever be able to surpass the achievement of winning the world title belt at Goodison Park. He's had big fights. He's had pay-per-view fights against the likes of Nathan Cleverly. He's gone away, fought for world titles in big matchups internationally against the likes of Adonis Stevenson. He's moved up to cruiserweight and he's won a world title at his beloved Everton. However, what are Tony Bellew's finances like? Now, I can't claim to be an expert on boxing finances, but I've certainly heard several interviews with Tony Bellew where he himself has suggested that he is yet to have earned the mega bucks from boxing. And to be honest, it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me that maybe Tony Bellew isn't in a position yet where he is wealthy for the rest of his existence. That is what this fight provides. David Haye is a massive name. David Haye is a surefire ticket to pay-per-view. This fight is going to do very, very well on pay-per-view buys. I know people in the hardcore are going to hate it and say it's not competitive. Mark my words, this will do a lot of pay-per-view buys. David Haye is a mega name in boxing. The hype for this fight will be expertly promoted and generated by Eddie Hearn. By the time fight night comes, I'll be watching, you'll be watching. You may not be paying for it, I'll be paying for it. But the hype this will generate, it will be a big fight by the time it comes around. If Tony Bellew didn't take this fight, he would have had to have fought Bradis for the WBC Cruiserweight crown in a mandatory. Now, hardcore boxing fans will know that Bradis is an extremely tough fight, and that Bradis would likely start as a substantial favourite over Tony Bellew. Bradis is not a pay-per-view fighter. Bradis is not a ticket seller. Tony Bellew as a standalone is not a pay-per-view fighter. Tony Bellew can sell a ticket, but he's not exactly selling out massive arenas. My point here, what I'm getting at, and I'm probably being long-winded, what I'm getting at is Tony Bellew was faced with an extremely tough fight in Bradis, which would have been a fight that was low in marketability and a fight that was low in financial reward. The alternative is a fight with David Haye. Now, I don't personally think this is a winnable fight for Tony Bellew. We'll come to that more later. But nevertheless, if Tony Bellew believes he can beat David Haye, now is the time to catch David Haye. David Haye's been, he's a lot older than when he was at his pomp. His two return fights, we haven't really seen much from him. Prior to that, we know he's had huge injury problems and been out of the ring for 4 years. So if he was going to fight David Haye, now would be the time to do so. David Haye just provides Bellew with that career-changing, life-changing payday. And even if he loses, it's not necessarily a career-ending defeat. Bellew simply says, I was never meant to be a heavyweight anyway. I'm going to drop back down to my natural weight class. Similar to what Kell Brook has done versus Gennady Golovkin. In many ways, this fight may even make Tony Bellew a bigger name. It's going to cross him over into even more celebrity status than he's enjoyed previously. So what I'm getting at is don't be surprised whatsoever if it transpires that this is a very sensible business move for Tony Bellew. The purse for this fight will be 20 or 30 times bigger, surely, than the purse he would have got against Bradis. And both were very, very risky fights. A Bradis loss would have been devastating. A David Haye loss may not be so career-ending. For Bellew, it's a calculated fight. As for David Haye, I did a video a month or two ago called Is David Haye an Evil Genius? Yet again, this guy has proven it. How many fights has David Haye taken where he will have achieved 7-figure paydays for minimal risk? Audley, John Ruiz, Demori, Arnold Jurjai, now Tony Bellew. Tony Bellew, a guy who was dropped by Oval McKenzie at light heavyweight, a guy who has stopped by Adonis Stevenson, who's a small light heavyweight. Now, I appreciate Bellew was sucking himself down massively to make the weight, and would have been weight drained. But the fact of the matter is, for me, if you're getting dropped by Overall at light heavyweight, it's going to be hard to have the punch resistance to go in against David Haye at heavyweight. Love him or hate him, David Haye is one of the hardest punchers in the sport. And I think David Haye's new style that he seems to have developed under Shane McGuigan will actually help him in many ways to get the nod over Tony Bellew. Not that he probably needs any improvement to get the nod over Tony Bellew. But what I've seen is that Shane McGuigan is a guy who really gets his fighters utilising the jab. We've seen that with countless fighters under his stable. I know George Groves has always had a jab, but David Haye is a fighter who hasn't always fought behind a jab. And for me, against Demori, against Jar Jar, we've seen him using his jab more and more and really looking to establish it early on. Now, I've always said one of Tony Bellew's biggest weaknesses is a complete inability to block a jab. I suspect that David Haye will use the jab early against Tony Bellew. And I just don't think Tony Bellew is going to have a response to that David Haye jab. It's going to be so quick, it's going to be so hard. I don't think Bellew is going to find a response. Cast your mind back to the Mateusz Masternek fight. Cast your mind back to the awful Nathan Cleverly fight, the second fight. And what you will recall is both Masternek and Cleverly win rounds with a bit in hand against Bellew when they get the jab going. When they get the jab going, Bellew's head is getting snapped back every time they throw it. Now, the difference between David Haye and those guys is David Haye is going to carve Bellew open with the jab. It's going to be a harder jab. It's going to be a quicker jab than those guys had. But then he's going to be following up with that haymaker. And that's a game-changing punch. That is a game-changing punch. For me, Tony Bellew's never been a guy with elite defence. He's never been a guy with elite balance. He's an inaccurate puncher. He's a hot-headed guy. For me, he's going to, for David Haye, his new style, which I would describe... David Haye as a youngster, I would describe as an explosive, athletic fighter. He's still got that, but now I'd describe him as more of a jabbing, counter-punching, explosive fighter. For me, David Haye, he's got good head movement. He's got good upper body movement. He's going to be jabbing Tony Bellew. He's going to be frustrating Tony Bellew. He's going to be carving him open with that jab. Bellew's going to throw something. David Haye's going to slip it, open him up with the jab, and that big haymaker's going to end it. And I don't see Tony Bellew being able to take the power. I just don't see it. I do not see it. Tony Bellew, for me, has never been a genuine cruiserweight. I've met Tony Bellew several times. He's 6'2", 6'3". He carries a lot of extra fat at the weight. Tony Bellew, for me, is a guy who would be best at, 185 pounds, that sort of weight limit. At 200 pounds, for me, he looks unnecessarily heavy. You don't need to have a six-pack in this game, but he looks unathletic and heavy. And for me, that has resulted to him at times being slightly slow on his feet in fights and potentially losing a bit of energy in the later rounds. Tony Bellew has never been, in my opinion, a genuine 200-pound fighter. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Clearly, he's a genuine 200-pound fighter. But Tony Bellew has never been a guy who has been completely suited by a 200-pound division. Now, at this fight, I don't know how Tony Bellew's going to weigh in. I imagine Bellew's going to be 210, something like that. And David Haye's probably going to be about 220. I just imagine that the extra weight is going to do Bellew no good whatsoever. I think David Haye's going to jab his head off, and I think David Haye's going to stop him, probably in the first 3 or 4 rounds. I don't see Bellew having the skill or the punch resistance to keep David Haye for longer than that. I've written Tony Bellew off on this channel more times than I care to remember. Since I started this channel, Tony Bellew has been my most unsuccessful fighter to comment on. I have picked against Tony Bellew huge amounts of times, and he proves me wrong time and time again. I've underrated him terribly. I picked Junior Makabu to beat him. I picked Nathan Cleverly to beat him. I think I picked Mateusz Masternek to beat him. And each time he's done far better than I expected. And Bellew is an improved fighter. But for me, the holes in his game are too vast. Too vast. He's stepping up to fight a guy who I consider to be an unpopular yet elite fighter, with elite speed, elite power, and a style that is near perfect to beat Tony Bellew. Could Tony Bellew come on strong late and wear David Haye down? Could he test out old David Haye, who's been out of the ring and who hasn't fought a meaningful fight for years? Could he grind him down? Could he take his stamina away from him? Could he test that David Haye chin that people have debated for many years? Is that a possibility? Am I underestimating him? Hypothetically, yes. But I cannot see the fight going that long. I cannot see it. I just believe Tony Bellew is too easy to hit. I believe David Haye is too hard at punching. And I believe, unfortunately, the fight gets stopped very, very, very early. Tony Bellew can come back from a knockout defeat to David Haye. For David Haye, it's another well, I'm assuming we're now talking a multi-million-pound payday for David Haye, where I see him exposed to very, very limited risk. Very limited risk. For David Haye, this has to be an excellent platform to return to Sky Sports boxing pay-per-view. You know, there's huge fights out there for him. Anthony Joshua is obviously a fight that will be called for extensively if he's to be victorious in this fight. And it'll be very, very interesting to see if Eddie Hearn takes the risk on Joshua. Hearn seems happy to take the risk on Bellew, who has a very, very difficult fight in Bradis for minimum money. Will Eddie Hearn risk the golden child, Anthony Joshua? I'm not so sure. Let me know your thoughts on this fight, people. Am I making the same mistake I've made time and time again in writing Tony Bellew off? Or is this the time where enough is enough and Bellew's inadequacies in the ring will finally get sewed up? Is he capable of making heavyweight? Is he capable of, surviving for 4 or 5 rounds and making it difficult for David Haye? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you've enjoyed this video, please take the time to subscribe to the channel and hit the thumbs up button. Hope everyone's doing well, and thanks for taking the time to watch the video. Cheers.